Hi, my name is Jennifer Simpson, and welcome to another episode of Here's the Deal. Today we're going to be talking about a pretty important topic in the HD community and something you might have heard on our episode with Eric Johnson. Today we're talking about survivor's guilt. And we have with us the wonderful Melissa Ryant. Melissa has been a member of the NY board for several years. Right now she is the chair of youth services and recruitment, and Melissa comes from an HD family. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks, Jennifer. So my name is Melissa. I'm 30 years old, and as Jennifer mentioned, I'm with the National Youth Alliance Board, and I have been with the board for the last 6 years, ever since attending my first NYA day in Jacksonville, Florida. And my mom had Huntington's.
So, Melissa, why is the issue of survivor's guilt particularly important to you? I know we've talked a bit about it and brought it into the NYA space, particularly with young people. What about survivor's guilt is really important for you?
I think something that's really important is acknowledging it and starting to have a conversation about it. I think survivor's guilt in general applies to the HD community as to anyone that feels guilt because they are not the one with HD. And that can be someone at risk, someone not at risk, for maybe a spouse, for example. But typically, survivor's guilt refers to testing gene negative and all the feelings of guilt that go with that. I think it's an important topic to talk about because for me, I had a really hard time kind of defining and describing all these feelings that I had. And it wasn't until I was able to meet someone and talk about it and talk about how guilty we felt for even talking about it that really kind of shed light to what the feeling was all about.
So there's sort of this assumption that, okay, if you test negative, all your worries are over, you should be over the moon. And if you're not, somehow you are not taking advantage of that, or you're ungrateful, or any myriad negative ideas and feelings.
Yeah, and I appreciate having conversations with people who test gene negative and kind of delving into what these thoughts and feelings are. And suffice that to say that not every person that tests gene negative experiences survivor's guilt. Some do feel that relief, that elation, that ability to go on with their life, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think for those who do experience survivor's guilt, it can be such a wide range of how much they feel it, from being kind of light to heavy, and it's just not a one-size-fits-all.
When did you become aware that you were experiencing survivor's guilt? So, what kind of clued you in that something wasn't kind of going well for you?
The first moment I recognized it was right after I received my gene negative result. I was driving home and I felt this sense of relief come over to me that was really foreign because I really did not expect to test negative. And that feeling went away very quickly once I realized that a lot of my family, including my siblings, were still at risk and I wasn't. Shortly after getting my gene negative result, someone in my family tested gene positive, and it was a very overwhelming feeling of all these thoughts of, why not me? Why can't I take this away from them? It's not fair that they have to be sick and I don't. And I'm not ready to become a caregiver. I don't want to be a caregiver. I'd rather have HD, and I wish I had HD, and I wish I could take it from every single person that I meet. And it's this rapid fire of all these thoughts and feelings that still hit me from time to time and weighs really, really heavily.
So it sounds like when you were going through your testing process, you had a really strong assumption of your results.
Yeah. I grew up knowing that I had Huntington's. It was never a question in my mind of the possibility of testing negative. Most of my family tested positive, so I figured, I would too. My mom had HD and was symptomatic my entire life and passed away when I was 20. And there's never a doubt in my mind that I had it. I think sometime in grade school was the first time I looked it up and saw, 50-50 chance. And that's what I would tell people. But in my heart of hearts, I knew that I had it. And I was perfectly okay with that. So right after, when I was 24, I decided to get tested, and my geneticist called me with, quote, an early birthday gift and told me I was gene negative.
Mm.
I broke down crying right where I stood, and that was when I was driving home and I kind of had that sense of relief. But then it quickly followed up with those feelings of guilt and feeling sad and angry and anxious and worried about what's going to happen.
Did you find after once you started to feel those feelings of guilt, I can only imagine, but if I were in that situation, I would imagine myself kind of feeling a little bit of distance between myself and those people in my family who had tested positive. Did you see any impact on those relationships? How did that kind of play out for you?
Yeah, it definitely affected the dynamics of my relationships with not only my friends and family, but especially with those who were gene positive. Um, and a lot of it were those guilty feelings, or every time I felt like they were showing a symptom, me freaking out about it and needing people in my life to put me in check and say, okay, well, so and so's always been like this. It doesn't mean this is a symptom. And to which I go, you're right, but still.
Hmm.
And I think one of the most important things I've learned is to really live in the moment and not in the future, which has been hard for me to kind of embrace, but I think that's been really important in helping those relationships.
Yeah, because something I like to think about is forward thinking leads to anxiety, backwards thinking leads to depression. So if you're constantly in this sort of phase or feeling of thinking what's happening in the future, what will be happening to this person, how will they be symptomatic? What will you do when they're symptomatic? What will you then have to do as a caregiver? It's just like this giant ball of anxiety that can overwhelm your life. What did you hit a point where you're like, okay, I need to figure out how to deal with this. I need to figure out ways to manage this, the sort of guilt, the anxiety, the sort of maybe depression, or even a feeling of sort of resentment that you weren't positive. Like, how did you start to manage any of those feelings or all of those feelings?
I think the first step that was really important was acknowledging it. And not to say I was ever in denial of feeling all that guilt. It's just that, there's this box labeled survivor's guilt, and it was mentioned to me in passing by my psychologist. And I felt like it seemed so casual that I'm like, this possibly can't fit the intense amount of grief and guilt that I'm feeling. And so it was really hard for me to kind of find words to describe that, which is what led me to reach out to support. And I started to carefully have conversations with people I meet at convention that would test negative. And I say carefully because if anyone feels like I do, feel guilty enough for even having a conversation about it.
Mm.
And around that time was the first time I met Mary Ann, who's the chair of the NYA. And we've hosted sessions on this topic before, but we met in DC to advocate on the Hill, and it was just the two of us out back of the Hill House and shoveling snow and crying and sharing all these guilty, terrible feelings that we have. And I think as isolating as even just coming from an HD family and no one understanding it, it's always so refreshing to feel comfortable and safe enough with someone that you can be vulnerable and you can understand each other.
Mm.
And our conversations led us to have more ways to describe this feeling, which helped me acknowledge it more wholeheartedly. I think another important part was allowing myself to mourn, which is kind of a strange concept because it's not like I lost anyone because I tested gene negative. But I did. I lost a part of my identity. And the biggest thing is that I know I'm just like my mom in mind, body, and spirit. And the idea that now there's one part of me that's not like her was really hard to lose. And I think, too, it's mourning the loss of these types of relationships that I have with my family members, especially those who are gene positive, and thinking about taking on a caregiving role and how that's going to shift our relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of led me to the final realization that if I'm going to take care of others, I have to take care of myself, which I think is just one of the most important things you can do. and I've been really bad at it for many, many years. So the last few years have been like a big transition for me in understanding my limits, reflecting on my thoughts and actions, and knowing that I don't have to be so happy-go-lucky and outgoing and social all the time. I'm allowed to feel drained. I'm allowed to feel sad. I'm allowed to be moody. Even when I am moody, people tell me I'm not moody and I'm still happy. But to me, I'm moody and I'm letting myself be moody. So I think that's really important. And also accepting that just because I tested gene negative doesn't mean that HD still doesn't affect me in every way.
So I was gonna ask, you talked about identity and feeling and mourning the loss of an identity. And I imagine if you have also your whole life thought that you were going to have Huntington's disease, that's also a huge part of your identity, that if you test negative, all of a sudden you have to shift. And you have to think, oh my gosh, I've had my life planned out for me. I've had every decision, I knew all the decisions I was going to make because I had this one thing that was in my life that I was so sure of, and that's that I was going to have HD, and I was going to test positive. And then all of a sudden you get a gene negative test, and that just gets kind of blown to bits. Like what was that like for you having that identity shift as well? Did you also, and I know I do compound questions a lot because I get excited, but my other thought is, did you ever feel a loss of identity within the HD community as well? Like, did that ever come up for you?
I think that compound questions, compound answers. I think that was the biggest way I felt like I lost my identity. I don't think I made specific choices in my life just because I was going to have HD. I didn't invest more into retirement, or I didn't get the insurance you're supposed to before your tests. Like, I didn't prepare for any of it. I just knew that once I got confirmation, I was going to continue living my life, and that just might motivate me to live my life faster. So I didn't make any specific decisions that were just because I thought I was going to have Huntington's. So when I tested negative, it was like, okay, well, I thought that was going to kind of motivate me, and now I don't have that. Being a part of the HD community, meeting the National Youth Alliance, creating this family of Ohana has been really valuable to me. And when I first started going to convention, I've always felt like included and loved and embraced no matter what. But I think the more and more that I met people, that was when I was having a hard time talking about what it was like to be gene negative. And you see some people who test gene negative who kind of disappear from the community, and that's okay if that's what they need to do. There's nothing wrong with that. And then but I decided, I'm going to stick around no matter what, because I need to be an advocate. I need to be a voice for all of these beautiful, wonderful people when they can't be anymore. I think the hardest part about that, like, going off from like identity, but I've had to deal with the guilt of my family of people being gene positive, but now I have a whole nother family, and it's a whole nother set of guilt of being gene negative. And some of these people have just become some of my closest friends, and find out when they're gene positive, it just breaks my heart. I so badly just want to take it from them. And for like all the younger kids in the National Youth Alliance, knowing that sometimes I just all of a sudden remember that they're at risk and that one day they might test. And it's like a punch in the gut over and over again, because it just breaks my heart. But all that to say that, like, they're the reason I guess haven't lost my identity within the community, because I know who I need to be for them, and that's kind of what motivates me to keep going.
And it's also the reminder that even regardless of your gene status, that doesn't diminish the impact that HD has on your life, right?
Yeah.
A negative gene result doesn't wipe away the impact that HD has on your life from the past and also in the future. Right, because we know that it's not as though HD will now disappear from your life because you're gene negative. You might have siblings, you might have cousins, friends who you've met who are still going to go through this process, who might be gene positive, who are gene positive, and you're going to have to sort of ride this ride with them as well.
Yeah, and after, my family and then even with like the community and the National Youth Alliance and realizing that this guilt is always going to kind of be a revisiting thing. And now I'm dating someone who's at risk, which is a position I never thought I'd find myself in, of loving someone so much and being worried about what might happen to them. But if it's taught me anything, I know that no matter what, if and when they decide to test what the result is, that I'm still going to love them no matter what, because love isn't conditional. And I think that's like one of the most important lessons I've learned from being a part of this community.
Jeez. God, how do I follow that up? I mean, something I also wanted to touch on was the role that caretaking has in the life of someone who tests gene negative. Because you mentioned this idea of you test negative and then you have this realization like, oh my God, wait, that means that this will fall to me, that this is now part of my identity, as I will end up as a caregiver as opposed to being cared for. How did that kind of play into your experience of guilt as well? Did that also have any component of resentment in it at all?
I think definitely to some extent, and the fact that I've even said that I don't want to be a caregiver, I don't want, I feel so terrible saying that, and I know that from some of the people in my life who are gene positive, that they already feel that guilt for having to be a burden on someone, which makes me not want to talk about it even more, even though it needs to be talked about. And I think one of the hardest parts for me was realizing that, growing up with my mom with Huntington's, it was normal. And it was just the day-to-day life. I didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. But now I'm an adult, and adulting's hard enough. But now I do know everything going on behind the scenes. And, there's sessions talking about getting care in place and financial planning. And I'm like, oh, I need to go to these sessions, and I don't want to. And that's hard. And then I wonder, for every person that tests positive, whether they're in my immediate family or in my Ohana, I'm like, who's going to take care of them? And I think Marianne and I are just going to open up a facility and just ship everyone in.
Great, we can connect you some good social workers.
Yeah. I think there's quite a few of them
around. I wonder as well, does that knowledge of caregiving, especially as a gene negative person, how does that impact your relationship within your family? Thinking of your immediate family who might be gene positive or who might be in that familial caretaking role. Has there been a change in those dynamics after your negative test?
I don't think that on the surface there's been any changes. Everything is still the same, and everyone in my family has decided their level of involvement, and everyone recognizes that I am the super involved person. But I made a promise that I'll never push that. I will always offer up information, offer up opportunities, and if they want to take it, they can. If not, then not. I've had some family members kind of starting to reach out to me about getting connected with doctors and starting to take some proactive steps for early onset symptoms. And I feel good about that, and I feel good that I can have answers for them. But I also feel guilty because I realize that some part of me has been possibly avoiding some of those family members because I just don't want to see it. I don't want to see them getting sick. And that's really, really hard. And I think the last couple of years have been a lot of me trying to build up that strength to make sure that I'm ready when that time comes. And I think that's why I've been so much more aware of how easily drained I get and not putting so much energy into being this crazy outgoing person, because there are bigger things in store that I need to save up for. So learning to manage that has been really important because I think that's going to help me out in the long run.
Yeah, so sort of being in tune with what you're feeling, not trying to avoid those feelings, saying, okay, instead of pretending that these feelings don't exist, I'm going to try and work through them.
Yeah.
So otherwise, they're just going to keep kind of knocking at your door louder and louder and louder.
Yeah. Even, like I said, in my relationship with someone who's at risk, we've always promised to, when we have these like scary thoughts and feelings about what the future might hold, that we're always going to acknowledge them and say them out loud to each other. And then we just let them pass, because that's the only way through them. And saying those things out loud, I think the hard part about talking about survivor's guilt is that saying all these thoughts and feelings out loud makes them very real. But the only way to heal is by making them real.
Yeah.
And that's what we always try to do.
Yeah, you can't heal a wound that you pretend doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something you mentioned before about how you manage your survivor's guilt. One is presence, being in the moment, trying to live for today as opposed to living in a sort of anxiety-riddled bubble, thinking about all of the things that are going to happen in the future or may happen or may not happen or on and on. And then you also, but I wanted to hear sort of what other things you do to help manage this. You mentioned seeing maybe a therapist. Like, what do you do for yourself, for your mental health, for your keeping Melissa good?
I think one coping mechanism I've always had is keeping busy, which no, I know. Such a shocker. This reveals all in this video. You never would have known, but and I do realize though that I have to have that balance, and even if I have little pockets of time that are me time or downtime, that's okay with me. But I do cope well by being kind of a busybody and being involved, but I recognize when I need to take a step back, and especially with being involved with the National Youth Alliance, the board is amazing and they're very supportive. We're very supportive of each other and all very good at acknowledging when we're like, hey, this is a month that you won't really hear from me. Like I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Typically February is my hardest month because it's my mom's birthday and then the day that she had passed. And that whole month time frame is usually when I tell everyone, you probably won't hear from me. I won't be such a busybody. Or maybe I'll be a busybody, but I'll just find other things to do with my time. So definitely that, having downtime and just trying to do things that I enjoy doing, even if it's through work or working with theater and different things that I'm passionate about. And I think it's also important that to talk about it and talking with other people in the NYA who really understand that feeling, talking to my friends outside of the HD community, and starting to have those conversations with my family.
Yeah, so not living in sort of that, like a culture of silence about it, right? Talking about it, I think you're right, it releases a lot of the power that these feelings will have if you keep them stored up inside. If you just let them out, they will become much less scary. They'll become much less of sort of little demon that kind of lives at your side. I'm also thinking about, like, if you're a young person, right, reaching out to someone in the NY, maybe reaching out to a regional lead, finding someone who you can talk to who might have a similar experience. If you're a fully fledged adult, reaching out to your local support group, reaching out to your local social worker, finding those people who you can have those intimate conversations with, who understand your individual experience. I think that's so important. And then I will always plug therapy because I think therapy is the best.
Yes, I agree.
Go to therapy. Every video I'm going to say, go to therapy. Because it's so, so, so important having like an impartial person to talk to, who has no connection to your life, who has no connection to your family, who will be non-judgmental. It's so deeply important. Melissa, I want to thank you for coming in and talking with us about survivor's guilt. It is an incredibly important topic, and I think one that we don't get to talk about enough. So I appreciate you coming in and having this conversation with me.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Anytime. And that's the deal with survivor's guilt.